But honestly, like, when Jonathan and I started this podcast and he wanted to talk about energy and all this stuff, I turned my nose up at it. I was like, that's not what I'm trained to do. I'm a scientist. I don't want to be like spouting ridiculous theories, and that's crazy. But, a combination of sort of personal exploration and I've had a variety of interesting medical things happen that in many cases Western science was not able to provide support for or an understanding, and started literally on a whim exploring some more alternative methods, which honestly are not so alternative anymore. But, when I first started dipping a toe into this, and it sort of made me think, gosh, there is more than what Western medicine can offer. And in the same way, there is more than what Western philosophy and Western rationalism can offer when we're understanding larger components of our functioning as, human beings, not human doings.
Hello, and welcome to the Psychology Podcast, where we explore the depths of human potential. Today, it's great to have Mayim Bialik and Jonathan Cohen on the show. Mayim is best known for her lead role as Blossom in the early 1990s NBC television sitcom Blossom. She's also well known for playing Amy Farrah Fowler in the critically acclaimed CBS comedy The Big Bang Theory. She also served as host of Jeopardy for 2 seasons. Bialik holds a BS and PhD in neuroscience from UCLA and hosts a popular mental health podcast, Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. Today, we also have Jonathan Cohen on the show. Jonathan is co-creator and executive producer of Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, as well as a writer, poet, father, and futurist who imagines and designs new applications of technology. With over 2 decades of training in mindfulness and healing, Cohen seeks to find ways to fuse storytelling and somatic experience. Cohen and Bialik met 10 years ago at a toddler birthday party and began a connection fueled by shifting the collective understanding of mental health and emotional well-being. It is my delight and pleasure to shine a spotlight on both of them today as we discuss lots of areas of mutual interest. So without further ado, I bring you Mayim Bialik and Jonathan Cohen. It is so great to have you on the Psychology Podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. In some ways, we can view this as just a continuation of a conversation we've already begun. I was recently
Yes,
on yours.
we had you on Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, and so excited to get to talk to you more.
Yes, I'm so excited. Where to begin? First of all, how do you two know each other? Where did that come from?
So Jonathan and I met, we have children who are the same age, and we had mutual friends. And when our kids were toddlers, we literally were introduced kind of socially. Jonathan had gone to graduate school at the American Film Institute, and he and I sort of connected around that. And then we sort of lost touch. This was in the days before cell phones were really an active part of lives. So he went back to Toronto, and then we reconnected. We had both been divorced, and our kids were older, and we started this podcast right around, the start of the pandemic. And yeah, Jonathan is in many ways the business and kind of creative, innovative side of Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. And I read the books and do the research and show up, and we do our best together in this podcast.
What are you trying to do with the podcast? What's like the main mission?
I think it's changed, right, Em?
Yeah. I mean, I think when we started, a lot of people were not talking about mental health, mental wellness. It was still sort of a dirty word, to sort of say like, I go to therapy, or it's an integral part of my life, or I have a variety of symptoms that tend to group under this DSM diagnosis. It was still really kind of like whispered in many cases. And at the beginning of a global pandemic, we realized how many people were lacking basic information about what anxiety looks like, what anticipatory anxiety is like, how that would affect us. So that's sort of where we started. But, as Jonathan can talk about, we sort of saw an evolution, in how we talked to people, and some of the themes that started being highlighted, no matter what we were talking about, has in many ways become more of the thrust of our podcast now. Jonathan, you can speak to that if you want.
Yeah. I mean, It feels like there was something that we were connected by before we started the podcast. There was a bit of a mysticism. There was a synchronicity to how we reconnected. We tell the story actually involves Michael Singer and Peter Levine in different ways. And through the course of both of our lives and through all the experts we've spoken to, we've realized that well-being, however that is defined, has a spiritual component to it. There is a connection to something greater than ourselves that is through all the great teachers, and it more and more science is catching up to trying to quantify and explain why it is that having that connection, that sense of wonder, awe, a sense of being connected to something greater than yourself, has physiological benefits. And so more and more the podcast is looking at that intersection and trying to make sense of the things that are not immediately understood by quantifiable science.
Well, I think this is a topic all of us bond over, and I felt like there was definitely overflow from our conversation on this topic that we could talk about. No, well, we should make it very clear. I assume everyone knows this, but Mayim, you have a PhD in neuroscience. Isn't that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
I trained, I was on a TV show, Blossom, from the time I was 14 to 19. Then I effectively left the industry. I did 5 years undergrad in neuroscience and Hebrew and Jewish studies at UCLA. And then I continued to the doctoral program. I studied psychoneuroendocrinology, in particular obsessive compulsive disorder, and the hormones oxytocin and vasopressin. I worked in a population of Prader-Willi syndrome, which is a genetic syndrome of mental retardation. And so that is my training. I'm trained as a science communicator. I had my first son in grad school, and I took my doctoralhood pregnant with my second son. And then I designed a neuroscience curriculum for junior high and high school students here in the homeschool community in Los Angeles. I did not do a postdoc, which already sort of puts me on the outskirts of academia. And then I ended up, working on the Big Bang Theory while I was still teaching for part of that, and was on the Big Bang Theory for 9 years. And
Why did you do the Big Bang Theory? And was there a point in your life where you were thinking, oh, I want to be a professor. I want to be a neuroscience researcher.
Yeah. When I fell in love with science as a high school student. I had an incredible tutor. It was my first kind of one-on-one tutoring experience, especially with a female mentor. And what I discovered is that while I didn't learn as easily as a lot of the kids who were natural math and science students, I did have the brain capacity and the organization to be able to study science. So, I wanted to be a research professor. I wanted to study psychiatry. I actually wanted to go to med school because that was the kind of only way people were talking about mental health back in the 90s, was like, go be a psychiatrist so you can deal with, people's mental health status. It's kind of laughable now because we know there's so many other paths, and there are many more paths that have opened up. But I did not have the grades to go to med school. I just could not get an A in organic chemistry, and ended up doing a doctoral program. Yeah, OChem was a killer. So I was planning on being a research professor, but after having my first son, I realized that I felt it was much more my calling to be home with my kids, especially with my training in neuroscience and, embryonic development and things like that. It's not the choice for everyone. It was the choice for me. So that automatically limits your capability as a professor in terms of doing a postdoc or, going on to do further research. And we were actually connected by Sam Harris, who was a colleague of mine. We were in the same neuroscience class for our doctoral program. Yeah, so that's how I know Sam. I mean, I also know Sam's parents because I worked on a TV show that his stepfather produced for my whole childhood. But anyway, I did. I thought being a teacher was for me. The reason that I started auditioning again was I was running out of health insurance, and I had a toddler and I had an infant and I had no health insurance. And I figured if I can just get a few jobs, I'll get some insurance back to be able to take care of my kids. I had never seen The Big Bang Theory. I did not know that I was auditioning to be on, what was eventually the most popular comedy in America.
You didn't know that was going to blow up like it did. Yeah.
No, I mean, I joined in the end of the third season, so it was already obviously kind of, a lot of fans loved it. It was a very
Yeah.
popular show. I just wasn't a TV watcher, still am not. But yeah, I had no idea that trying to get a job here or there to try and pay for health insurance would, turn into being made a regular the following season. And, then that was sort of the trajectory of my life. And, my kids kind of grew up with me working on a sitcom in those days, and they're now 16 and 19.
It must have been exciting times.
It was very exciting. I mean, playing a neurobiologist was really fun. It was fun to put a female face on, science. And also Melissa Rauch, who played Bernadette on The Big Bang Theory, played a microbiologist. So I wasn't the only female scientist, but obviously being paired with, Jim Parsons, is really, really powerful, sort of figure in terms of physics, in terms of popular science. It was very special also to play the girlfriend of a character who, many people viewed as androgynous and who shouldn't have relationships. And there was a lot of interesting conversations about the spectrum back then. And we never labeled our characters. And, that was really important, especially to Bill Prady, who co-created The Big Bang Theory, as he talked about, the various diagnoses that people would give those characters. But it was very exciting to be part of that. It was also very exciting, to be able to still be with my kids to a large extent. The sitcom schedule is very friendly, and obviously parenting was very important to me. It, it was the decision. I didn't do a postdoc, so.
Absolutely. You mentioned you were on a show that was produced by Sam Harris's father.
No, so I was on Blossom. Blossom was a production of Whit Thomas Harris. Yeah, so Blossom was produced by...
What a small world. What a small freaking world.
Yeah, so Sam, when I was on Blossom, Sam's stepfather, Paul Witt, who passed away a few years ago. Paul Witt was my boss, and Sam was, I think, in his 20s and finding himself in India at that time. But when we connected in grad school, he's like, yeah, I think you know my mom. And indeed, I had done some episodes of some shows that his mom had produced as well. So yeah, kind of a strange small world.
So I'm going to put on my fanboy hat for just a moment. I promise, just a moment. But as I was researching you, I realized that you were on so much of my favorite childhood shows. So you were on The Facts of Life. You were on MacGyver. You've been on MacGyver. Yep. You've been on. You were on a Michael Jackson video, Liberian Girl.
Liberian Girl.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you ever just reflect on your life so far and how varied and dynamic it's been?
I guess, yeah. I mean, I've definitely had a lot of experiences, a lot of different experiences. I really enjoyed my time in academia and, kind of missed those days in particular. I think that's sort of, for a lot of people, we find, that's where we're comfortable, is talking with other people intellectually and, connecting about that kind of level of meaningful things. So, there's been many aspects to my life. And I think, being a parent and also making a decision to, sort of be home and all that entailed, it's also a huge part of my identity. But yeah, I guess I've lived a lot of lives just in this one.
You sure have. And then Jeopardy. I mean, I'm such a fan of Jeopardy.
Yeah.
What was that like? You were both a host and a participant, right?
No. So I was brought on after Alex Trebek passed away. I was brought on as a guest host, and then ended up being part of a very public conversation and was chosen as the host. I was at that time working on a series, which ended up going 3 years after The Big Bang Theory, and very famously would not cross the picket line in the last writer's strike. And in that time, Ken Jennings was selected as host. So, it was an incredible experience. And I think one of my most fun and gratifying work opportunities, because it combined all of the things about me that are geeky and nerdy with, the ability to try and present that information and highlight incredible individuals, with unbelievable knowledge, of subjects that
of course.
Many of us could not hope to master one category of.
I thought for some reason there was one episode where you actually were a contestant.
No,
and you
we did. I think
donated
an
your
episode
money
of
to something
Blossom
other.
had me as a contestant on Jeopardy.
Oh,
Like we did a Blossom
that's
episode.
so funny.
I think it was,
Wow.
yeah. So yeah, that was like a dream sequence in a Blossom episode. But no, I actually don't
Wow.
excel. I don't excel at Jeopardy.
Okay.
People are like, oh, you're so smart. And like, it's not about that. And there's people
Mm.
far, far smarter than I. And, the kind of, recall and, as you can probably speak to, the kind of information recall and storage of information that individuals who excel on Jeopardy have, that's not something that I have. I know, a lot of specific things about some specific categories. I do really well in like anything relating to Hebrew language, Near East languages and cultures, things like that.
I see.
All things Middle East, historical and liturgical. But yeah, my neuroscience knowledge is also, it's pretty narrow. So I'm not really like I do amazing on Jeopardy kind of person.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, you said you're really interested in Jewish studies, right? Are you related to Chaim Bialik?
Yes, Chaim Nachman Bialik. Yeah, on my dad's side.
Yeah.
He was a very famous
Great poet.
Many people call him the Shakespeare of Israel or the poet laureate of Israel. There's a Bialik Street in, most every major city in Israel. So yeah, I grew up with that as sort of part of, I guess, our heritage.
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool Jeopardy trivia.
Thank
you. Now, so both of you, Jonathan, I promise to bring you back in here, buddy. But both of you really do bond over so both of you are interested in science, and you really can get into the nerdiness with me, but you're also into what perhaps science could never prove or could never show evidence for. And I was wondering how you reconcile your interest in both of those things, because you don't often see, I mean, I am like that too, but you don't often see many people like us who have a real passion for both of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that first and then hand it over to Jonathan. I mean, I'm a person of faith, so that already is kind of considered curious that I'm a scientist who's also a person of faith. And, my understanding of divine things and things outside of our realm are not significantly different from any intellectual conversation or scientific conversation about the existence of something greater than ourselves. I always joke that my kids say I'm cheating and I don't really believe in God, because the God that I believe in is the God of gravity and nature and awe and wonder and, all of the laws that govern the material world that we can experience, with a sprinkling of, an understanding that not everything that we can feel is quantifiable. Jonathan is much more on the healer side of things. I'm much more on the science side of things. But yeah, I can let Jonathan speak to sort of where those intersect for us.
Yeah.
I've always felt that the pure materialists are missing something crucial, but I have always been seeking the people who understand hard science to bridge that gap, because I believe that the hard scientists can explain it, just most of them don't, or aren't curious, or are closed off in a way that they haven't had the experiences that open their minds and have shown them firsthand that there is more to life than what can easily be explained. And so I'm just fascinated by the people who want to explore the hard problem of consciousness, or who are interested in extrasensory abilities, or who don't dismiss the somewhat supernatural by, as we had with Jeffrey Kripal when we recently spoke to him. He's like, well, if you take everything off the table that you can't explain and say that you can explain everything on the table, you can only do that because you've eliminated a lot of potentially curious and mysterious and in aspects of our world that require deeper evaluation with a curious approach.
But honestly, like, when Jonathan and I started this podcast and he wanted to talk about energy and all this stuff, I turned my nose up at it. I was like, that's not what I'm trained to do. I'm a scientist. I don't want to be like spouting ridiculous theories, and that's crazy. But, a combination of sort of personal exploration and I've had a variety of interesting medical things happen that in many cases Western science was not able to provide support for or and understanding, and started literally on a whim exploring some more alternative methods, which honestly are not so alternative anymore. But, when I first started dipping a toe into this, and it sort of made me think, gosh, there is more than what Western medicine can offer. And in the same way, there is more than what Western philosophy and Western rationalism can offer when we're understanding larger components of our functioning as, human beings, not human doings.
We've also spoken to a large number of, very reputable scientists, MDs and neuroscientists and neurobiologists from Harvard and all the large schools. So, and they're pushing the conversation to say, wait a second, we can use the word energy and not have it be so woo-woo. Like the body is an energetic system. Our cells produce energy. So let's redefine some of these terminologies to be more grounded and clear in terms of what we are actually using them for. And so I don't think that they're the outliers in terms of, or I don't think they should be discredited. These are reputable people from reputable institutions. So what's happening is that the language and the conversation is sort of merging from the people who were either once seen as only as the yogis, or the people who were the hippies and only outside of society and, would never go to a doctor, to the Western medical system. While it has its incentives to push pharmaceutical drugs and they can be helpful to reduce symptoms and suppress issues that are going on, more and more medicine and popular conversation is talking about, well, how do you build the system to run effectively, and how do our minds and our relationship to our emotions and to the things that we sense, how do those also impact our physiology as well?
Hi all. I want to take a moment to make a few important announcements that I'm really excited about. As you all know, I'm committed to helping people self-actualize. In the service of that, I just had a new book come out called Rise Above: Overcome a Victim Mindset, Empower Yourself, and Realize Your Full Potential. In this book, I offer a science-backed toolkit to help you overcome your limiting beliefs and take control of your life. Are you tired of feeling helpless? This book will offer you hope, not by identifying with the worst things that have happened to you, but by empowering you to tap into the best that is within you. Rise Above is available wherever you get your books. Are you a personal coach looking to take your coaching to the next level? I'm also excited to tell you that our Foundations of Self-Actualization Coaching 3-day immersive experience for coaches is back by popular demand. Foundations of Self-Actualization Coaching is a course offered to enhance your coaching practice by offering you evidence-based tools and insights to equip you to more effectively help your clients unlock their unique creative potential. You can learn more about the course and register by going to centerforhumanpotential.com/SAC. That's centerforhumanpotential.com/SAC. Okay, now back to the show. Yeah, these are obviously very important questions. Mayim, you wrote a book on attachment parenting, or you co-wrote it, right? I'm not making that up.
No, I wrote it. Yeah,
you wrote it. Okay, excellent. Called Beyond the Sling. So what are some of the main principles in there? Like, why did you write that book?
Yeah, I should mention, and my publisher would want me to. I wrote 2 books on puberty that were bestsellers. Beyond the Sling was not a bestseller. So I'm supposed to mention also, I wrote 2 books on puberty, one designed for girls, one designed for boys, in terms of the kind of endocrine, physiological and also psychological, implications of puberty. And those are called Girling Up and Boying Up. But I wrote Beyond the Sling after my second son was born. At that time they called us mommy bloggers. There was this new thing called the internet where people who were writers, and I was a writer, could share intimate and important things about their life journey. I wrote for a Jewish parenting website called kfeller.com, and people really resonated with hearing sort of a lot of the perspectives. What I specialized in, which I think in some ways is still what I specialize in now with our podcast, apparently I specialize in taking things that people think are stupid or don't have a basis, and I explain the significance of them, either personally or scientifically. And so with Beyond the Sling, I took the principles of attachment parenting and I explained the science behind why birth matters, why breastfeeding matters, why bonding matters, why gentle discipline matters as opposed to using, harsh punishment, and disciplinary measures that can, kind of, I guess, erode certain aspects of our connection with our children. And at the time, people thought it was crazy to advocate for breastfeeding. They thought it was nuts that there was any value to a natural birth, or that you would insinuate that there might actually be hormones, for example, that are significant, that, flow from the mother's body to the babies during birth, things like that. I think it was also a time when a lot of people were concerned that bringing up anything that worked for you was an attack on people who did it differently, meaning I never said that there are not reasons that people don't breastfeed, or that people have to breastfeed, or that people have to have natural birth. I understand that's not for everyone. C-sections can be life-saving, but one of the things I talked about in the book was a C-section rate of, 30%, which is about what the U.S. hovers at. At that point, the side effects of those surgeries are more dangerous than not having C-sections in certain cases. So anyway, I wrote that book kind of to explain what I saw as the neuroscientific understanding of just the normal human biological process of parenting. And I also am a lactation educator counselor, so I did speak from that perspective as well. But it's kind of interesting because, a lot of those principles have worked their way also into our podcast, and the climate is very different now. People are out of that sort of hyper defensive mode of like, I'll have a C-section and use a bottle if I want to, and it's no difference. We're back to having conversations about, gosh, what does it mean when we talk about the implications of the choices we make, not just with birth or breastfeeding or anything like that, but with how we kind of conduct ourselves in general.
That's wonderful. And then in terms of what you found to be the best disciplinary method, can you just elaborate that a little bit? Like, because the research shows, gentle but firm, but I talk about that in the book, and it's actually something that does come up on our podcast a lot. We do talk about parenting and sort of what are the ways that discipline and parenting impact the brain and developing psyche of a child. We're pretty clear on that. I raised children with a lot of discipline, probably more discipline than I think a lot of people associate with attachment parenting per se. But yeah, one of the things that comes up a lot and came up in our Michael Singer episode, it comes up in our David Rico episode. It never makes sense to a child to be hit by the people that are supposed to love that child. And this is something that, we don't really see as controversial. People are allowed to parent however they want. But yeah, harsh discipline, and not seeing all parts of your child can be very damaging. And we've spoken to a lot of child specialists, and we sort of talk about, what does it mean to raise a child? What does it mean to give them an environment where they can flourish spiritually, psychologically? And so, that's one of the things we've definitely tackled. Well, it's a really important topic.
And I should add, in terms of, kind of our conversation and the notion of what science can calibrate, I can't believe that we needed to wait for longitudinal research to show that children who are hit and who are subjected to harsh discipline have more challenging outcomes, statistically speaking. It kind of astounded me that we had to wait for the longitudinal data on that one. And there's a lot of, complaints and criticism that people have about people who don't hit their children. But yeah, generally speaking, I have found that anytime that I have felt a need to be harsh, to yell at my child, to, feel a desire to act out at my child, it has 100% of the time been that I don't have the resources, the support, or the rest that I need, or the kind of education to understand how to deal with children. It is never that children are trying anything but to have their needs met. But they will get louder if their needs are not met, and they will get more persistent for sure.
What has been your experience?
Mayim and I have a similar philosophy, had a similar philosophy when they were young. We actually met through our children. And I would say that there's a phrase that I've heard, I don't know where it comes from, but like, are you wiring them for connection? I don't believe personally, and this is not, I'm not in the data, but I don't believe personally that children have the ability to self-regulate on their own. They co-regulate with their adult counterparts. So sending them, for example, banishing them to their room as punishment versus, okay, we're going to have whatever this timeout is, but still being, establishing that connection where you can still be in the same room, but we're going to change the activity. I think there's a huge misnomer between attachment and having no boundaries and letting them do whatever they want. It's not that you can ever set boundaries, that you should. You should let them know what is acceptable, what isn't, when behavior needs to change, when lines are crossed, but doing it in a way that isn't punitive, doing it in a way where you're not removing the connection. And actually, sometimes it's more connection, especially during the temper tantrum years. And I'm not even talking about 4, which is sometimes really hard because they get their own opinions and drives and motivation. But like in the 10 and 11 and 12, when sometimes there's a lot of energy and a lot of emotion. I remember even 8 had a lot of that. Sometimes it was literally, I'm just going to sit on the side of your bed and you don't want me here, but I'm not going to walk away from you, even though I would rather go cool off and like look at my phone or do something other than be around you because the tension is so high. But instead, I'm going to allow you to freak out and know that you can throw appropriate things, whether it's stuffed animals or pillows or soft stuff. You can have an appropriate response that I'm not going to squash. And you're also not going to lose connection to me for having those emotions.
Beautiful. You guys sound like great parents.
I'm not so good.
You're trying. Can we say that at least? Let's say you're trying.
Oh yeah.
Your best.
No, I do my best. But I think, my goal is to have my children actively choose to hang out with me when they don't have to. That's, to me, is the measure of how I'm doing.
How would you describe, like, if you had to describe your personality, Mayim, how would you describe it? You're a little sarcastic.
I'm self-deprecating. I think that's
self-deprecating too.
I think yeah. I'm pretty I don't know. I mean, Jonathan probably has. It would kind of be a fun exercise to have Jonathan describe my personality and me describe his. I'm very routinized. I like to say, when people are like, "Oh, I'm really flexible," and like, I like to work with other people and get new ideas and find new ways to do things. That is not my style. I am very rigid, but in many ways it can work. In many ways it can work to my favor. Yeah, I'm a meticulous person. I'm funny. Like, I think I'm a funny person. I like to see the funny in things. And yeah.
Scott, when you came on our podcast, right at the beginning, you said that you were just a big child. And there's a childlike aspect of Mayim also, where if you ever watch her watching NCAA basketball, especially like men's Final Four, she's slamming the table. She's like, has the enthusiasm that mostly you only see in very young children. And so she'll have those ups that are really astounding and make her have a joy for the world that is quite profound. And then also she'll have the 90-year-old grandma, we're doing this now. So she has both sides of those coins. But no, I would say she's philosophical and curious, intellectually curious. She does like her routine. But when she's encouraged or nudged out of it, she often protests, but then will get excited about it and then really dive in and then does things quite meticulously.
Cool. Yeah, whenever I have like a celebrity on my podcast or like someone who's an actor or actress, I always ask them, who are you? The real you? Because a lot of people don't really get a chance to know, they may know your characters that you've played, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So it's something.
Yeah, I mean, that's also part of why I think, there's interest in the podcast that we do, is because I do choose to speak very openly and very frankly about things that, yes, a lot of celebrities are now talking about, but, 4 or 5 years ago when we first started this, it it was, kind of a little bit of a risky decision to say, I have OCD. Like I didn't, we didn't call it that when I was a kid. These are the things about me, or I have anxiety, or I had, I've experienced debilitating panic attacks. Like I struggle with depression, like these are just things that many, many people experience, and kind of, I think some of that vulnerability was part of what, we tried to bring as novel, to our podcast. And, the other thing is I'm the only non-MD, who hosts a podcast for us that hovers where it does in Apple Podcasts. Usually the things that we talk about are the domain of MDs and also of men. So that's the other thing is, as a female in the science space and as a female kind of public person in the science space, it's also an opportunity to talk about some of the unique challenges that women have, both for women to hear about and also for men to hear about. So yeah, some of that vulnerability is really built into the podcast. And I'll be honest, like I have social media. I see what it's like when, like an attractive celebrity is like, I was depressed, but then I went on this medication and everything's amazing now and my life is fantastic. That's not the story that we tell. I tell the story that I think a lot of people experience, which is I grew up in a really complicated home. I grew up in the family disease of alcoholism. And that means that there's a lot of coping mechanisms that the entire family has to undergo in order to manage. And what happens is you get these really complicated personalities that sometimes have challenges with things. And there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows. That's my human experience, whether, I've been nominated for Emmys or not.
I love that. And I didn't know you had OCD. So I just learned that just now.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I like to point out, like for many of us, it was just how I operated. I had a very clever psychiatrist when I was in college say, do you have a favorite number? And I was like, don't we all? And he's like, no. And I said, well, I have several favorite numbers. Would you like me to explain? And have a lot about counting, a lot about numbers, which I think you can probably relate to. And yeah, there's many different features of OCD. I ended up studying OCD as my thesis. So yeah.
Yes, I can definitely relate. I do have a question. Did you ever have any panic attacks on the set of Big Bang Theory? And I ask this because I think you are very inspirational. And especially the more that you talk about your own vulnerability, the more inspirational you've just become in the last 5 minutes.
That's very sweet.
More inspirational. Yeah, because a lot of people may see some of these things as debilitating. And yet you've been so successful. So I'm just wondering, yeah.
No, for me, panic, my panic disorder was in my late teens and into my 20s. So a different phase of life. And no, I think on Big Bang Theory, it was a time in my life where I ended up, in that time, I got divorced, like my father died, a lot of other things happen when you work with people for a decade. We all had different things happen. But what I actually started experiencing during Big Bang Theory was I began perimenopause during Big Bang Theory. And I remember the exact taping when I had my first hot flash and I couldn't understand what was going on. And I thought, gosh, Amy Farrah Fowler does wear a lot of layers. I'm really, really hot tonight. Like something's wrong. And I was standing in my dressing room under the air conditioner and my hair is naturally wavy and they straighten it for Amy Farrah Fowler. And my hair started curling underneath, like it was like that hot in my head. Anyway, so that's kind of a fun thing to remember that I began the process of perimenopause on the set of Big Bang Theory.
Wow, that's so interesting. Wow. So how did you overcome your panic attacks? Like it sounds like that was when you were younger, but what helped you?
Well, I think the kind of sad story is that, if you presented in the late 80s, early 90s to a doctor with any sort of mood disorder, the first thing they did if you were female was to put you on birth control, even if you were not sexually active. In many cases, they felt that would help. I was not having a hormonal problem, but I definitely had one after starting on the pill. And for a lot of people, birth control pills are really helpful for regulating things. But for me, that was not the solution. Back then, they just put you on Xanax. They put you on Xanax. I didn't even really have proper therapy until I was in college. And yeah, I saw at that time a psychiatrist. This was just what mental health support looked like. They would just kind of medicate the problem and say, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. No one asked me what was going on in my home. No one asked me what I grew up with. No one asked me what my relationship was like with my parents or my brother. There was a lot going on.
That's very interesting.
For me, over the course of many years and finally getting into good psychotherapy, I started exploring some of the mechanisms underlying why my brain tended to things the way that it did. Panic disorder is no joke, and that was actually one of the first things that when Jonathan and I started our podcast, I really wanted people to understand the difference between anxiety attacks and panic attacks, because they're very different. They have a different mechanism and they can look similar, but the fear of having a panic attack leading to other panic attacks is unique to panic disorder. And it really did. It followed me through my 20s. I did learn that there were certain environments that triggered panic, and even being around people who were intoxicated or stoned could bring on a panic attack. For me, there was something about control, the loss of control, or even experiencing other people not in control. So yeah, I'll be honest, I took a lot of therapy. I'm a huge proponent of effective psychotherapy. There have been times in my life where I've been medicated. There have been times in my life where I have not been medicated. I don't get to say what works, but I think one of the other things we've gotten to talk about on our podcast, which I know you also are not afraid to delve into, is, sort of the way that we view mental health and mental health problems. There's this sort of notion that, if Big Pharma says to take SSRIs, everyone needs to take SSRIs. And the fact is there's a lot of different components to how we understand our brains, how we fit, what environments will bring out the best in us. And we don't all have to be the same. And that also goes for how we treat, many of the mental health challenges many of us present with.
So did you ever take medication for the panic attacks?
Yeah. I mean, I was on Xanax for years. Gotcha. That was just sort of like, that was the procedure. And then, I definitely, and we've talked about this on the podcast, I've tried dozens of different medications. I've tried just about every known combination that there is of, SSRI, atypical neuroleptic, name it, add a thing, do a thing. I've seen all the commercials. We didn't have commercials back then. It was just a psychiatrist saying, try this one out. And often within a day, you'd have side effects that were like, I feel like running my car off the side of the road. Okay, stop that medication. Let's try a new one. So I did that dance for many years. And yeah, my life's very different now. And I have to incorporate a lot of other practices. And honestly, our podcast has been really helpful in me learning about some of the things that people do instead of being on medication. Again, we don't make any recommendations like go off your meds and have a great time. But we do talk about many spiritual aspects, the role of meditation, learning how to calm down your sympathetic nervous system and all those sorts of things. Those are part of, kind of part of my life in a different way now.
Yeah, it's so important. We have similar vibes on our podcast or on our respective podcasts, which is why I'm really excited that you guys came on to mine today, and that I was on yours. There's a lot of I was trying to just research you as much as I could, and I feel like there's conflicting. There's a lot of commonly searched terms, questions about you, and there's even disagreements on how your name is pronounced, and that drove me crazy. Is it Mayim or Mayim? And I got
just like the Hebrew.
Mayim. It's Mayim. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Hebrew for water. So yes.
I felt like I was trying to doubt my own sanity about that because some were like it's Mayim, and I'm like, oh my, well, how do I introduce her? So I had a panic attack over that, to be honest. But anyway, one thing I thought was interesting is that people keep mentioning your high IQ, and you were listed in like top 10 celebs with the highest IQ. And I find with this kind of stuff, it's not like any of these things are verified. They say that Einstein's IQ was like 200 or whatever, but it's not possible actually to get. I could explain the technicalities of. You can't actually score 200 on an IQ test. So have you ever had? First of all, were you in gifted education as a kid?
Yeah, it's funny because, so much of my life was determined by a test that I don't even remember taking. What is true is that I was one of many, many students, in the region of Los Angeles that I live in, who went to a very fascinating school. It was the basis for Head of the Class, which was a TV show that was on about a group of gifted kids.
Show.
So that was okay. So that
were you on that show at all?
No.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
that show was based on the junior high school that I went to. So I went to a particular junior high school for which there was an IQ requirement that apparently I satisfied, as did all of the other people. I like to say I was one of the stupidest people in that entire junior high school because my junior high school was largely made up of, kids who completed their high school math and physics and all those things in the 7th grade. It was a program where some of our teachers were professors from MIT. I was learning logic and Latin in the 7th grade. So I went to one of these kind of programs, but I'm a product of public school. I'm a product of the public school educational system. My parents were teachers. My parents had a combined 70 years of teaching. My dad was a public school teacher. My mom was a nursery school director. I'm a second generation American kid whose parents never owned a house. We rented, everything was always broken. The floors were always torn up. We didn't have heat when I was a kid or air conditioning for that matter. So I'm just a kid who went to public school. I'm a product of the busing program where they took kids from poor neighborhoods in the late 70s, early 80s, and they put us on buses to send us to fancy schools that had magnet programs. And the idea was that every child, no matter what their background, deserves the right to have access to an enriched education. So I was the product of those programs. And, I was one of these kids who, if you look at my report cards, I was always talking. I had trouble not focusing on whatever boy I had a crush on. I made a tremendous amount of careless errors. I worked very, very fast. I never fit the diagnosis of an ADHD kid, but I was always rushing. There was always a fire under my tush. I don't know why. It's just a self-generated, meaning it was nothing from the school environment that I was in. So I don't remember taking an IQ test. My brother skipped a grade. My parents assumed that I would do the same. So they started me in kindergarten a year early. So I was always really tiny. I was always the youngest. But yeah, I had parents also who, like I said, they were both teachers. So they were very, my mom was very into helping with all my projects, and my dad, as well, did homework with me. But I struggled a lot. And, I think it's really popular for people to be like, oh, this celebrity's so smart and blah, blah. And the fact is, yes, I went to college, I went to grad school, but even in grad school, I really struggled. I was not a natural science thinker or a science student. So, for me, it's very interesting that as a celebrity, I'm sort of held up to this, she's so smart. Whereas in grad school, it was kind of I don't know if Mayim's going to finish. She just is having trouble with data analysis and stats right now.
Wow. Yeah, because on the internet, it's so specific. It says that it's reported between 153 and 160, a very specific band.
No, I don't know how anyone would also even have that. Like I said, the junior high school that I went to did have a minimum requirement, which was around that. But no, I've never released the results of my IQ test. And, for me, I think that, I was a natural humanities student. I'm a very fast writer. I'm a very fast reader. Never would it have occurred to me that I could even master math or science the way that I ended up doing it. And so, I think the brain obviously is malleable. And so much of that was about habits. It was about, as you've written about so brilliantly, you have to teach to where a kid is at. And for me, I needed a one-on-one tutor to show me how to organize, memorizing. I have a somewhat photographic memory, which does make certain things. Yeah, it does make certain things easier. But, when it comes to, analysis, and I never imagined I would do the highest level of physics, biochemistry, calculus, the chemistry, the things that were required of me in college and in grad school, even though I struggled. I had a deep love and understanding of the nervous system, which, is the basis of how I see the world.
Yeah, well, you obviously, however you slice and dice it, you're very smart. But you do also point out
I also do a lot of really stupid things, though. You'd be surprised.
No, you're funny because I was just going to say, but don't worry, I'm going to deprecate you now. But you did it yourself. So I was going to other deprecate, and then you self-deprecated. But no, I was going to say, but you illustrate how even gifted kids, it doesn't mean that you have a complete high profile on every specific ability. You do actually often see lots of jagged profiles, as we call them technically, amongst gifted children. So I appreciate you speaking to that. And you, I also just to speak to that point, my parents started teaching in Harlem and the Bronx, and at a time when Black students weren't even allowed into the New York public school system, and my mother taught at a women's prison. I was raised on stories of every child deserves an education. Every child deserves enrichment opportunities. So I think that also, I never felt big for my britches because I was raised to believe what I still believe is true. Every single child, if placed in the right environment, can be loved, supported, given that opportunity to shine. And the fact that we now can talk about different kinds of intelligence, which is something also Jonathan has introduced to our podcast as a place of conversation, is incredibly important. Jonathan is a person who, struggled to read, to write, he was also being taught 3 languages because he's Canadian and that's what they do there. But Jonathan has been one of the people who's been very helpful in helping that become part of our podcast's conversation of, some people are spiritually intelligent. What does that mean? What does it mean if they can't spell, but they have an understanding of things that are beyond our understanding? That's intelligent too. And your book really helped me see, gosh, the entire system is structured around, a scaffold that in many cases is helpful, for, military, or, if you're trying to run a government, but not necessarily if you're trying to grow human beings. Well, that's exactly right. And I appreciate you trying to bring Jonathan in. We don't want Jonathan to feel left out at all here. I am fascinated with your early childhood and your I don't know, why did you go into acting? Why blossom? How did that come about?
I liked performing in school plays, and there's a lot of reasons that actors like and seek that kind of approval and attention. I had friends and I was popular, but my favorite thing was to make a teacher like me, especially a difficult teacher. I'm a master of reading the room and trying to, bend it to my will. So I really liked school plays, Yeah, I mean, it's control, but it's also safety. For me, it wasn't from a malicious perspective. It was really no, but some people really like applause. Some people really like to know that they're amazing. That's not my interest. Do you think I'm amazing enough that you're happy? That, that's kind of the definition of a codependent actor. But for me, I thought that meant that I should be an actor. I'm so charismatic, but I kind of wasn't one of these Hollywood hammy kids. I felt very awkward at auditions, and most kids who were auditioning for things had been acting since they were 2 or 3. And I was a late bloomer to start at 11. I was literally in rooms with kids who were real master manipulators of an environment. And, I would go to auditions. It was not uncommon for children and their parents to say to you, "You look tired. You okay? I don't know if you're going to do well today on this audition. You look a little tired." I mean, that was just standard issue. So I'm grateful that my parents, my mother in particular, believed in me enough, to not point out to me that no one on television looked like I did. Meaning the notion that a large featured, very scrawny, poor Jewish kid, from Hollywood should make it in the industry. There was nothing on television to indicate that my face was going to belong anywhere. And indeed, I didn't do well in commercials, because it was called All American, if you can imagine it. At the time, they wanted all American kids. That was literally in the casting description. And I was called in if it said all ethnicities submitted, which meant send in the... Yeah. So I was this weird looking kid. And a year after I started acting, I got cast to play the young Bette Midler in beaches. And that's kind of where my life
Oh,
changed. And I was then given my own TV show after that.
oh yeah. I remember that. I remember beaches. Okay. That was you.
I was the little
Okay.
redhead girl. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, yeah. What does large featured mean, by the way?
I mean, like I have an Eastern
What does that mean?
European, I have an Eastern European face. I have a prominent nose, a prominent chin.
Oh, I see. I
Yeah.
see.
So like, all American kids, they wanted like small features and like blue eyes and blonde hair and just
I
like
get it. I
very
totally get it.
generic. Yeah. And I looked like, an Eastern European kid.
I totally get it. Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I just think that you really are inspirational to a lot of people. And you also, I mean, I've really admired the way that you just spoke out when the Me Too movement happened in Hollywood. Like that's something I wanted to just register. I really appreciated that. And just being able to kind of talk about, like, you're a woman in that business. Like, you have eyes. I'm sure you've noticed a lot of patterns of behavior that probably annoyed you over the years, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I was on Big Bang Theory at the time, that the Me Too movement happened. And, yeah, I got a lot of attention, at the time over a piece that I had written for the New York Times before actually the Me Too movement happened. But, being on Big Bang Theory at the time was a very interesting, sense of perspective because, there are so many ways that people interact, when they do have familiarity, and kind of everything comes into question when you have a movement like that, rock the industry. And I think we're still seeing, the impact of that. And obviously it's extending out as it should.
Yeah. Well, what I really like about you is your whole career, you've really leaned into what is unique about you, and without apology or shame. And I think that is
Some shame.
beautiful. Maybe some. Do you ever feel imposter syndrome about anything, about science or acting?
Yeah, I think Jonathan can probably, I think
Good.
Jonathan can also probably speak to that, because it definitely plays into
Yeah.
when he has to like pitch things for the podcast. And I always think no one wants to talk to us or me.
Scott, your homework after this episode is to go back and watch the Glennon Doyle episode of Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, which is, I don't know, first 15 episodes, and that will be your answer.
Okay. Okay.
So yes, a
Well,
lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of fear. I mean, I think, in many ways, I'm trained as a scientist, and again, it's like really fun for Hollywood headlines to be like Dr. Mayim Bialik, but I'm not a practicing neuroscientist. I did not do a postdoc. Like, going back into academia is something I knew that when I stayed home with my kids, I knew was an avenue that was closed to me. So I serve a different purpose as a scientist, but that sort of, creates imposter syndrome on the academic side. And then on the Hollywood side, there's always this notion of like, oh, but she did this other thing. And oh, she's been nominated for 5 Emmys, but she's never won. And, she's not leading lady looks, but like she's got her own thing. So yeah, a lot of sort of in-betweenness, which again, I think a lot of people can relate to, even if it's not on, the kind of scale or in the ways that I experienced it. I think a lot of people feel a little bit stuck in the middle.
Yeah, I remember you called me. You're like, "Well, you're a real scientist." You said to me on when I was on your show, and that really actually took me back, because I was like, I don't know. I felt like I wanted to like defend you. Like I went into like justice mode with that comment, because I was like, you're a freaking PhD. It is so, people don't realize how hard it. I don't know if I could do I did do a PhD in neuroscience. Never mind. Yeah. but strike that from the record. I did do a PhD in neuroscience, but I was going to say, I don't know if I could do it. But I think people don't realize. I forgot who I was for a second there, but people don't realize how freaking hard it is to do a PhD in neuroscience. Not only how hard it is, but how much you have to really learn the literature and what is. They don't certify you to be a PhD unless you also show knowledge of the pre-existing literature at a really high level.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I did this at a time, you can probably relate. I did my PhD before the use of computers as the basis for your literature study. So, for us, old dinosaurs, it was a very different process. Things weren't available online. There was a handful of things you could get online, but most everything you had to sort of get in person, purchase the journal, or go to the library and do it in the stack. So it was a very interesting kind of laborious process. But yeah, I mean, look, I went to UCLA. It's a very, very fine research institution. And, I worked in the Neuropsychiatric Institute, and I was really grateful to use the resources, to work with the population that I did. And yeah, I ended up studying the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which comes up a lot on our podcast as people talk about stress and about trauma. And so, I actually am really grateful that I have that vocabulary. And yeah, I'm a very proud Bruin. I was there for the entirety of my undergrad and graduate career. And so, yeah, it's something to be very, very proud of. And like I said, there's also been so many iterations of my life, and becoming a parent and choosing to be home, definitely shifts that. And those are decisions that are still hard, for women and of course for men, but that's still something, that's a real challenge.
Yeah, the dissertation, it was called Hypothalamic Regulation in Relation to Maladaptive, Obsessive-Compulsive, Affiliative, and Satiety Behaviors in Prader-Willi Syndrome. Do you have any scientific journal articles that you published from that?
No, my doctoral research was like an exploratory study. So yeah, it wasn't something that was published from there. I did, I co-authored a chapter in a neuroscience textbook, with a few others from my lab, for the research that I did as an undergrad. But no, I was not a journal person. And, yeah, I was part of a very small lab, and actually my thesis advisor moved to Vanderbilt, right after I declared my, my doctoral, subject. So I was actually supervised from afar. So I wasn't part of a larger lab.
Well, I'll link in the show notes to your dissertation from ProQuest.
Oh, thanks. I think you can see the abstract. Yeah.
It's a hot read.
I think the whole thing's here. Yeah. The whole, I got the whole thing right here.
That's good times.
Yeah. Good beach reading. JC, we're going to bring you in here. For the last couple minutes, I do want to talk a little bit about the difference between spiritual intelligence and IQ type intelligence. JC, Jonathan Cohen, you strike me as someone with high spiritual intelligence. It's just an intuition I get about you. What is your own inner experience like? Do you feel like you draw a lot on your own sort of intuition and kind of altered state of consciousness?
100%. I mean,
yeah, I get that.
I don't know.
I gather it.
Yeah, I definitely do. I don't necessarily, intellectualize it as that.
Yeah, but what is the experience like? Do you, both of you two, do you feel like, would you describe yourself as having spiritual intelligence? And how would you
Jonathan has
describe
Jonathan has a belief in, energetic things and things that I struggle to even understand. But, as I frame it, he like checks in with the universe throughout the day about intuition. And like, that's new to me.
Wait, really?
So if I have to explain it, and this is something that was developed over time, right? Like I came to a lot of this stuff through intense emotional struggle, intense depression, questioning if life is worth it and what the path is, what is there a future? And throughout a lot of, finding joy and things to feel connected to, I had various teachers along the way, and one of them basically explained the universe, or, the world we're living in, is being filled with frequency, almost like radio wave. And so when I use it like that, when I sort of tune in, what I'm doing is holding an idea, a thought, a possibility, a situation in my mind, and then going to where that thing is around me, because I don't believe it is in me. I believe that the body is an instrument that can sense and deliver feedback. and that the information, or, by creating an image, like pick a scenario, how would it be to make 4 of these decisions, or like launch a new podcast about this particular topic? Is there energy or resonance around that the way I'm imagining it? And I can close my eyes and then travel inward while also holding that understanding or that image, and sort of tune in and use the body as a calibrated tool to say, is there, what does that feel like? And it could feel really intense and powerful, like there's a big spark. It could feel sort of sputtery or fleeting. It could feel disperse. It could have a sharpness to it, and there's sort of all variety of different feedback that can be delivered. And I use that to help me I just use it as another input, and then I analyze it. Well, why does it feel really dispersed and like it's kind of floaty and there's nothing that I can tangibly hold on to? Well, what if I add an element? What if it's not the idea I thought about, but something else? And does it change something? Or what if I add a person to it? And then sometimes it's like, okay, I'll put it away, and then I'll wait for that idea to come back and play with it again. But yeah, there's all manner of strategies to use that information. And I consider that information to be as valuable or more valuable because it can see beyond, the 200-foot headlight beam that I might have through my intellect and knowledge alone, because it calculates variables that may not have happened yet.
Thank you for expressing that. I think that it's very hard for people who are not like that to wrap their heads around what it's like to be like that. I'm resonating. Like, do you ever meet someone where you feel like there's some sort of incongruence and you just can't articulate it yet or cognitively figure out
100%.
But it kind of irks me when I see such extreme incongruence.
I mean, the most simplistic way to describe it is that the vibe is off. But but that's not a scientific term, and it's not intellectual, and it's very easy to dismiss that because it's so subjective. But I would imagine, if someone is coming to you and trying to like give you rational intellectual explanations of why something should happen or is a certain way, but there's an incongruence, you can sense it immediately. And for me, what happens is my ears, I'm an auditory processor, and when someone talks to me without a high level of congruence, I don't hear what they're saying. All I hear is I actually hear it. Like I could say, here's kind of what I think you're saying to me, but it sounds like gibberish. It's like wah, 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 wah. And I'll be like, well, you kind of just said this and that and the other thing, but I don't think it's any of those things that you're talking about.
Do you feel like you can detect psychopaths? I feel like I get like a certain spidey tingle when I meet some people, and it's like very rare. I'm not saying this happens every day in my life. I feel like I'm also very sensitive to other people's emotional lives. I can generalize it beyond just the psychopath thing. And it's hard for me to like differentiate their emotional life from my emotional life, like, because I feel like it's sometimes I get overloaded. I get so overwhelmed with feeling whatever they're feeling or not feeling. In the case of sometimes I am in the presence of people I feel like are so devoid of being able to like make a human connection that it like really scares me in a way.
Well, there's a couple things that strike me about what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I do relate, and I appreciate you sharing that because I think it is.
Thank you. If you responded, I have no idea what you're talking about, Scott. I think
no, not at all. I forget who we were talking to recently, but like we were having a conversation, and it was like, of course we interact before we actually physically meet someone. Like we've spoken about the idea that our physical body is not the limit of us, meaning that there's an energetic body around the physical body. So, and this happens through time and space also, like we're on this Zoom and of course we're interacting. But when we met in person, as you arrive, all parts of you arrive at the house, and then you get closer, and we're analyzing that data before you walk in the door. Then you walk in the door and we're analyzing that data. So what I hear you saying is like, you're just analyzing that data and aware that you're analyzing it. Most people do that anyway. have a visceral response, but the logical mind is so geared to being the dominant force that they're not aware that this is happening. So they may start to be like, oh, my stomach hurts, but actually maybe there's something going on in that interaction. Or other people, they may come into a room and almost like kind of glom onto someone and they're, oh, Scott's going to get a book. He's out. He's out of here. He's back.
Yeah. Well, I would say that not everyone feels that way, though. No, I think you're giving everyone too much credit.
What I would say is that that communication is happening all around, but I think in my experience, there's a few things that caveat this. One is that some people's energy body is very shut down and it's not a vibrant force around them. That can be the result, in my, again, non-scientific analysis, could be the result of many different reasons, so that I won't go into. But I do believe that actually most people feel it, but are not registering the fact that they're feeling it.
Interesting. Guys, I know we have to go and it's killing me because I'm left wanting to continue this conversation. So why don't we be friends and keep up the with your permission, with consent, let's be friends. And I really want to keep up the conversation. This is a great book that no one's read except me, called Boundaries in the Mind. And something I'm super fascinated with, which relates to what we're talking about, is there are individual differences. There really are in people who have inner boundaries between self and world. And there's so much here that hasn't been scientifically investigated. And I'm here for it. So
yeah, I'd love to continue this, and hopefully we'll have other opportunities to talk. One of the things that Jonathan, has sort of taught me about is that a lot of the reactions that I have, in many cases, a lot of the anxiety I have, may actually be that I'm receiving information that I honestly don't know how to process, or that I'm being influenced by things that I previously thought were, woo-woo. But, I've had more than one person say, gosh, certain people are really sensitive to things like, even if you don't want to believe in EMF stuff, sensitive to sound, sensitive to other people's emotions in ways that can disrupt your being. And it's been a really interesting exploration to say, gosh, what happens when we get quieter, when we try and master, what's going on inside of us before trying to take care of what's going on with other people.
Guys, so much here.
So much here.
Because I really do think there's something profound here. I really do think people differ in their boundaries, in the way their brains are wired, to allow them to receive and not receive stuff. So let's table that for further discussion. Thank you so much, guys, for being on my podcast. And this has been such a delight being on your podcast, and then you guys coming on my podcast. It's been an absolute delight for me. I hope it's been for you as well.
Well, we hope it will continue in our friendship and the work that we do. So thank you.
Sounds great.